Welcome to On the Brink, a fresh lens to take you and your business to new heights. Hi, I'm Andi Simon, and as you know, when you come to listen to us, I'm your host and your guide. My job is to get you off the brink. What I want you to do is see things through a fresh lens. I want you to see, feel, and think about it in new ways so that you can soar again. Often people come to us, our clients, all the clients in our book On the Brink came to us stuck or stalled. They couldn't see what was all around them. Individuals do the same as we coach them. The challenge is, how can a little anthropology help you see yourself in your business through a fresh lens? I'm so honored today to have with us for an interview that I just think is so remarkable is Dr. John Curran. Let me tell you a little bit about why I'm so excited, and then you will be as well. Listen carefully. Dr. Curran is one of the pioneers of organizational anthropology. Now remember, I named myself when I launched my business as a corporate anthropologist who helps companies change. At the time, I didn't realize there weren't any corporate anthropologists, much less people bought me because they really needed to change. What I did, they had no idea. So what I want you to listen to us talk about today is, what is anthropology and how does it apply into organizations? He combines his expertise in the social sciences and group dynamics with process consulting, systemic executive and team coaching. See, we both sort of share the same kind of thing, and research to work with senior leaders and their teams to develop dynamic and collaboration for organizational cultures that connect their values with those of their employees and wider stakeholders. In short, John and I share a common world where we want to bring the method, tools, and anthropology and that theory into organizations to help you do things better. And humans are complicated critters. You know, they hire me to help them change and then put me in a closet and lock the door. Please don't come out. I hate change. So it's really interesting. So a little bit more. Dr. Curran holds a PhD in social anthropology, formal training in organizational process consulting, executive coaching, systemic team coaching, a whole lot of stuff. He's an associate consultant at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which I hope he will talk a little bit about. He's owner of JC and Associates Consultancy and a visiting scholar at the Royal College of Art in Design Anthropology. Now that we have so much good stuff to talk about today, it's going to be such fun. His clients have included Coca-Cola, Hallmark, Novo Nordisk, J&J, a lot of the top, and everybody else who wants to come and hear him talk and share. John, thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, it's absolutely wonderful to be on your podcast, and it's one of my go-to podcasts. I learn from it all the time as well. It's wonderful.
Well, then I will make sure that as I'm recording and bringing my guests, that you're my audience. It is interesting. John had a great article from his thing on how meetings are held, and I'll get to that toward the end because I thought it was so insightful. We all are frustrated with ineffectual, dysfunctional meetings, and he said, just look at the roles people are playing and how they're doing it. But let's talk about you. What has your journey been? Share with us.
Okay, it's a kind of privilege to be able to share, because you don't really think about your journey much. And I knew you were going to ask me the question, so I did a little bit of thinking. And I guess I came into anthropology from a kind of indirect way. I think I became interested in culture unknowingly, and my first ever real job was when I was probably when I was 17 or 18, but my real job was probably I was about 20 years old. I failed all my exams at school. I was an undiagnosed dyslexic. So this idea of failing,
painful. Oh my gosh.
And it was in that sense, you learned actually how to look in between the lines. You had to survive, you had to hustle in a way, right? So but what I did, I got a job as a cleaner or a domestic staff at a day centre for the homeless in central London in Victoria, and it was run by Catholic Irish nuns, and my boss was actually a homeless guy. And it was kind of from then I started really taking on board the dynamics, what's actually going on in front of me, and also how just wonderful it was. I had such a great kind of experience and journey. And it was only kind of in my early 20s, I started going to night school again, and kind of I had the diagnosis of dyslexia. I got confidence back in me. And it was then that I kind of realized, well, I'm not going to be able to do statistics. I need something that I can use my brain and my creativity. And this thing called anthropology emerged. And I remember reading quickly an introduction, first few pages and shutting and going, right, that's me. I've got it. I'm going. So I was very lucky. I went from night school, I went to the London School of Economics, which was the kind of founder of traditional British anthropology, and where Malinowski was and all those great names. And it was whilst doing my undergrad that I started working to make a little bit of money as a care assistant on psychiatric wards in hospitals, in psychiatric hospitals. And it was then I realized that there's my PhD. I'm going to do a PhD, and I'm going to do it on the culture of psychiatric hospitals.
Wow.
And that's it. So I spent 2 years being a member of staff and actually working the shifts as the ultimate participant observation for 2 years, and understanding power dynamics between the different sections, all the way from the domestic staff all the way up to the consultant psychiatrists and the policymakers, and how that was played out and fluid and unpredictable on a daily basis. So it was very much looking at the microcosms or the micro aspects of everyday culture, but making bigger theories around how policy and ideology and values and mission statements and actually how they actually do work out. So that was my kind of journey in, and I got my PhD, and then it kind of developed from there. I spent time whilst I was writing my PhD, I got approached by Microsoft, and this was completely outside my area, if I wanted to understand how people use mobile phones. So that kind of led me for a few years into the world of innovation and, the world of design and market research and advertising and branding. But I was always more interested in the aspects of organizational culture and group dynamics. And that's where I sit now.
Don't you love it? I'm going to share just a smidgen of my own background. You'll know why John and I feel like we're part of the same tribe, because I discovered anthropology as an undergraduate. And I went, oh, that's just like you did. It was like an epiphany. And then I went to Columbia to get my last 18 credits in anthropology. I didn't have to transfer. I had gone to Penn State, and it was just the depth of Conrad Arensberg and Mervyn Meggitt and Siddell. I mean, all the Ernestine Friedel became my mentor, and it was like, how could you beat the best of the world in a field that I just sort of became a religious believer in? I wasn't even sure what I was going to do with it. But it sort of was who I was, as opposed to what I was going to do. When I met my husband 56 years ago, he said, what do you want to be now that you've grown up? I said, well, I can either be an attorney or an anthropologist. He said, I'll be an anthropologist. He also said, I'll be here for you, which he is. But it was one of those supports. And I had no idea what it was going to be, but it has served us well, hasn't it? Wow.
I really like what you said there about how it kind of becomes part of you. So you don't do anthropology for a specific career, right? That's a no-no. And it made me think about when I was doing my PhD at Goldsmiths University, which is part of London University. I had to do some seminar teaching for young undergrads. And what I would do, I'd get them to spend a week, and they would have to go and travel on London buses, the red double-decker bus. But they would have to spend half of the week only going on the top deck, and then the second half of the week going on the bottom deck, and look at the cultural differences of the two, so you could go into symbolism of gender or masculinity upstairs, and, Sherry Alton of binary oppositions. And I remember the feedback that they gave me was, we can't go anywhere now without looking at something anthropologically.
That's right. And it only took that moment of, now you couldn't bring them to Samoa, but you could put them on a bus, a normal, comfortable, and give them a job to look at it through a fresh lens to see what was actually going on. And that's when you say to people, humans are meaning makers. Nothing exists out of context. And so the upstairs and the downstairs are two different contexts. Same thing going on in a whole different fashion. Wow.
Exactly.
So, you have had so many great experiences. Talk a little bit about, you got going, you got your PhD, And tell me about your journey just a little bit longer, because you and I could get into the
Yeah.
details of life, but I'm
No,
anxious to share you.
that's great. So I mean, well, they're kind of two worlds. So they're still kind of overlapping. They both fed each other. When I was working mainly in innovation, and I would be brought into ad agencies to help the planners design and think in a certain way anthropologically. And planners in advertising were very much the anthropologists to a certain extent. But also when you're thinking, when you think about innovation around medicine or diabetes, and the anthropologist can go and really understand how people are living out their experiences, how they might take, for example, a medical device that they use in their everyday lives, but how in their everyday lives it has a different symbolic meaning.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't just have the use value of, say, administering insulin. It isn't functional. It's also part of the body. And when you bring in these anthropological theories and observations, you are able to work that back into the organization, like a medical device company or a pharmaceutical company, and challenge how they perceive the products that they use as a means of being able to design for the person designing for culture, designing for emotions, and not designing just for function.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was at an EPIC conference a number of years ago, and one of the panel was, why can't we get our clients, the CEOs or the C-suite, to believe the research that we have done for them? They immediately deleted. And I was I spent 10 years as an academic and then 20 years as an executive, helping banks and healthcare. And what went through my mind, and I said it gently, was they don't trust what you brought back because you haven't ever run the business. Mm-hmm. You're helping them see something from the outside. You saw it, but they don't trust that you really know what you're saying. And if you had taken them with you, maybe they would have. What are your experiences? Do people, the Novo Nordisk, I mean, do they really understand what you brought back to them? Do they apply it? How do we communicate? Because this is all about transformation.
Exactly. Well, I think actually Novo Nordisk are a unique example because they're the ones who have got fantastic anthropologists internally. Yes. Who they've done some great work around ethnography. It's very much part of their DNA. So they're probably and I know a lot of the leaders will be going into the field as well, or do go into the field. But if you think of it by and large around companies, yes, this idea when you do take execs into the field, it's life-changing. Okay, they all of a sudden realize that their products or the services that they're offering customers, let's call that there's a whole different world. People appropriate brands, products to fit into their lives, not the other way around. So then you can go another level, and then you start working. Well, if you're looking at the values of your company, how do they align with the values of your employees, but also your customers? And then all of a sudden you've got this kind of concentric circles moving out, and then all of a sudden you've got the holistic picture, and you can start thinking holistically with execs. There's also another problem, which is been around for many years, but this idea of risk. And when you're coming back with just stories and insights based on theory, it's not an Excel spreadsheet. It hasn't got statistics.
How did I know you were going to say that? I knew you were going to say that.
Right. So,
it can't be real.
Yeah, but exactly, and especially in a digitalized age where the worlds are coming together. I think that's probably less of a stigma nowadays, but it definitely was a massive barrier. How do we quantify this? We could do a survey of 10,000 people globally, but you're going to only visit 20 people. I mean, that doesn't weigh up, right? So there had to be a lot of education, a lot of even training for execs. And the final area, which now does very much still exist, where this is what really put me back into the world of group dynamics and organizational culture, were silos.
Yes.
So if you're thinking that you're doing the best, most amazing piece of anthropological research around consumers, and you run the best workshop, and you've got whatever, everything's on, it's perfect. You're not taking into account that the people who you are serving are coming potentially from cultures, organizational cultures that are siloed. Yeah. So if you have engineers in the room, and you have marketeers in the room, and you have sales in the room, they are three different tribes. They
All
all
right.
serve, they've got three different ways of thinking about what, and they also need to protect their expertise,
That's
their
right.
identity, their subcultures, right? So if you go in going, da-da, here's the anthropology and we're going to revolutionize and we're going to shock you, they will look at you and they will say, oh, we can project back onto you. We're not playing ball. It's too much of a threat to us. So then you have to work in a different way with them. And you have to respect the silo to a certain extent.
Well, the silo is there and it's not going
Yeah.
away. And you've hired people in because they're good engineers or good marketers or good in finance. You know, I was a bank executive, and you, as you step back and you look, having conversations, even lunches with people from, it was like one was speaking Roman and Latin and the other was talking Greek, and the words didn't have any meaning for the other. And you needed dialecticians who could move from one to the other and make it real. And those are real. I mean, that's life that they're living, and with comfort. And
Yes.
and as you try and make them now include the customer, who is that customer? And is it the buyer or is it the user? And it's a complicated world we're in. Having said that, though, corporate anthropologists in general, have had a far better time of it recently, over the last, I'll say, 5 years or so, than earlier. Because we were academic. In fact, I tried to hire some from a university for a client, and they said, no, we're just training them to be academicians. I said, wouldn't it be nice if they could help a business do better with their academic expertise? It was most interesting. But I do think that business, the fact that Intel had anthropologists, Genevieve Bell was there, Microsoft has them, the government uses them. I think there's a growing awareness that we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And design thinking has made ethnographic work extremely important. What a DAO does, it goes out and it starts by observing. And you're doing design work as well. What kind of work are you doing with the design anthropology?
But so the design anthropology came about again out of the innovation, where I would be looking, and I'd be always very interested in, we could look at products and how people actually use products, as I've mentioned previously. But what I was, and I'm still very interested in, is the workplace, and how, as designers, and some people say anthropologists are designers by default to a certain extent, but the way we think, there is a lovely crossover there. Traditionally, an anthropologist isn't really coming to a conclusion. They're leaving things hanging, where designer needs to finish something. But what I will be doing is talking to the world of design and architecture as well, around, well, what does a workplace actually mean? And I know that we've got differences with hybrid work and post-COVID, but what's the symbolicness of space?
Yes.
And a wonderful example actually was when I wasn't part of this, but when Lego started up their new headquarters in London. They used to have signs which were little cardboard cutouts of VW camper vans saying, don't park here, meaning, you must be on the move, don't make a place permanent in the workplace, and don't eat your food there. And people started rebelling against that, right? They're kind of thinking, well, actually, if I want to eat my granola at my desk, I should be allowed, I should be allowed to do it. And, and that's a really brilliant sign that you can think that you can design perfection that's going to enhance collaboration and well-being and all these things. But if you've got a management system that it's dysfunctional, it doesn't matter what type of sofa or how many tennis tables you've got or how much free beer there is on a Friday, it doesn't work. So you have to actually think about you're designing for the unconscious as much as the actual function as well. So that's what I try and problematize. That's what I do. And I think that's a key thing of anthropology. You take what is given as a norm, and I use a rather kind of brutal thing around, you get a sledgehammer.
Yes.
And you dismantle that normality. And that's what the anthropologist does. You don't take anything for granted, and you're looking in between the lines. It's a classic thing of if you read Shakespeare or Hemingway, or you read, Alice Walker, you're not reading the words, you're not reading the sentences, you are feeling an emotion and you're interpreting what's going on. So that's why the two of us could read the same novel and have a different interpretation.
Yes.
And that's the anthropology as a kind of the ethnographic text, ethnographic writing. It's interpretive. It's extremely powerful.
It is. And it's also the secret of our success, isn't it?
Mm.
So this is so interesting. So I made a note as I was thinking about this because Lego had an idea that really maybe never they asked their folks about it. It came up with it and it didn't work the way they had anticipated. It always is interesting to me how a group of people, call it the senior folks, have an idea and they forget that the folks who they are giving it to have no idea what they're telling them, what the story is, what the expectations are. They're not engaged in the design, and somehow they think it's going to percolate down. It doesn't work that way. And humans have stories in their minds, and we've learned from the neurosciences and cognitive sciences that you live your story, right?
Yeah.
And you're usually the hero in it. So I noticed that you also have a background in the brain stuff. You know, how do you weave together the neurosciences with the anthropology? Because I try to tell people, you know, you decide with the heart and the eyes, and then your brain gets in it, and you have a story here. It's trying to figure out what this is all seeing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, and I think probably just I'm probably more with the brain around the kind of psychoanalysis. So the neuroscience, of course, comes into that, also comes into culture, but I've always had an interest in the unconscious. And you know, this is leaning on the likes of Freud, Klein, Jung, but then much more into groups as well. So Winnicott and Bion as well, who I'm very, very influenced in. What I find really powerful, and this is especially around group dynamics as well, but not just group dynamics in organizations, but in life, is that coming together of the anthropology with the psychoanalysis, or what I'm into is what we call system psychodynamics, which is how the individual becomes part of a group and how there are these kind of games and interactions that are largely based on the unconscious. Okay, so this is a really powerful thing, and Melanie Klein was very influenced a lot that way of thinking. So we've heard these terms: projection, transference, countertransference. And if you bring that into also the world of anthropology and vice versa, you can be looking at team dynamics in an organization, and I'm looking at the unconscious structuring of ritual. Rituals of defense, rituals of change, rituals of power and authority. Those are the three ones I claim are the big meta ones. There are other ones going on. Now, within those rituals can be things around gender, around misogyny. All these everyday issues are being played out as well. What we wear, the clothes, where people sit around the table, all these type of things are unconscious, often unconscious, right? But they are forming cultural stories. The anthropologist Michael Jackson always talked about stories being the blood vessels of culture.
Yep.
So we can't have culture unless we have stories. Those stories are communicated often unconsciously. And that's why, I mean, I've trained, I've done the 1st year training, not the 7 years training, but in group psychoanalysis. So that's also really, the group itself becomes part of the culture.
Don't lose that thought. Let's emphasize it a little bit. Because dysfunctional group is at war with itself because each of the people in the group haven't come to terms with a shared story. And they're each carrying their own agendas. We hear those words, but there's something deeper than tactical, practical stuff going on here. They really see themselves in a different fashion. And that is very powerful. Now, how do we build, therefore, better groups? Thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good. I like kind of in a way starting with this idea that a group, or let's say a team, and if we're talking about organizations, can always have an element of dysfunctionality to it, because it's, you know, so that's kind of what I'm entering into, and that's what and that's kind of okay to a certain extent. But a group needs to focus on what we call the primary task. That's actually what are we trying to deliver.
Yep.
Right. And then if you've got silos within the group or between teams, that becomes harder. And then there might be defense mechanisms being played out. Anxiety then creeps up. Bion, the psychoanalyst who kind of invented this, spoke about the basic assumptions in groups. And that's often things around dependency. In other words, we'll do whatever the leader says, or we all admire the leader. We're not going to really have collaboration then. Or you have the things of fight or flight. We've heard this, but I don't want that change to happen. It's going to threaten me or threaten my professional identity. So along a journey, you can have all these kind of stakes in the ground of dysfunctionality. Yeah. And the way that you work with that, and I'm passionate about this, is I'm kind of trying to, it sounds like I'm setting myself here as the external consultant, but it's trying to empower teams to have this element of being reflective on themselves. And when I talk about empathy, I don't talk about empathy as a nice kind of word, how it's being played out. I don't talk about even empathy walking in the shoes of other people. I think the first real thing about empathy is being empathetic to yourself, which means having the ability to challenge yourself and be honest about yourself. So if we were in a meeting and I felt that you were being defensive or trying to derail my idea, I might not tell you that, but I'll walk away feeling something in my stomach. And the next meeting, I'm sure I'll bring that back into the meeting.
Interesting.
So it's about coaching. It's about, the term psychological safety.
Yeah. How
do you create psychological safety where challenge can happen? And there's one of my colleagues at the Tavistock Institute, Camilla, she talks about creating an environment that's psychologically safe enough. So not psychological safety, but psychological safe enough. And what's beautiful about that concept is it's allowing for dysfunctionality. It's allowing that people in a team will have different levels of what safety is. If you're a woman, if you're from a different race, if you're white, male, heterosexual, you're gonna have, there are these different personas or cultural toolkits you are bringing into that space. So psychologically safe enough, think about creating a culture of reflection as well, and challenge. Challenge is really important.
Not easy. Do you have a case study where this has worked or you're working that you can share? And if you can't, that's fine. It's something that concretizes it a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, I mean, it's basically probably all the stuff I work on is that. So I could be, so I won't give you a kind of, I can talk, I'm doing a lot of work with executive teams, okay? And they are highly pressured. They are highly pressured. They're all coming out of post-COVID.
Yep.
They are, and not just the exec teams, but the middle management and below are all feeling exhausted, yet they need to think about the primary task, yet they all need to be facing in the same way. And a lot of the exec teams and senior management are having to create what this idea of hybrid working means. There's no one knows what it means. No one knows what the future will be of it either, right? So, but what I will be experiencing is that there are tensions, but those tensions will not be exposed. Through team coaching or facilitation, there's a process that I use where I'll do qualitative kind of semi-structured ethnographic interviews with all the key people individually. And I'll bring that into the space. And then I'll reflect back what people have told me, confidentially, for what people have told me. And then everyone feels uncomfortable because they're experiencing uncomfortableness, but what they're experiencing is what they realize deep down is the truth. And then I've kind of got them contained. And if this is what you told me, now how are we going to work with it? And I can be the object of projection, so they can go, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And I think, this is great, carry on. There's no problem here, right? But I'm also in that space, I am being the anthropologist. I'm seeing the workshop setting as an ethnographic space. So I'm also decoding what rituals are happening, defenses, and I'm picking all that up. But even the uses of cultural artifacts, the flip chart, the who's going to get up and do these are all there. It's all data.
Yes.
Everything's
but it's also very challenging, isn't it?
It is very, it's not easy to do, and you are dealing with human beings. And this is where it's very different from being an anthropologist in the world of, say, innovation, where you go in and you're experiencing sensitive stuff, but you go out. I'm containing a group.
Yeah.
And it can fly off the handle at any moment. And you could say something wrong that could spark. So it's challenging, and it's also it's draining. And you need a supervision structure below you. Yeah. And that's what I use a lot, is supervision, as though it's the therapeutic space.
Before we could keep going because I'm fascinated. Before we do wrap up, though, share a little bit about that newsletter with the article about meetings. I think it's tactical, practical, but very insightful about I'll give you the context. When I got into healthcare, people met, like, 15, 20 people would come together routinely for a meeting. I was an ex-banker and an anthropologist, and I was sitting there trying to figure out, what are we doing here? There was no agenda. There was no takeaway. I didn't have any idea of my purpose, and nobody bothered to tell me either. But we met, and when I dug into it, they said, "Oh, that's what we do." I said, "Oh, okay. We come together to meet." Tell me about meetings. Tell our
that's great. But I gave a talk that's online, actually. I'll send you the link as well, at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And the Tavistock invented what we know as organizational development, 1947, I think. And it created this idea of at the time, it was being born out of the Second World War, about having to understand, how teams work in the military. But coming out of the war, it was looking at issues around the coming together of the social sciences with psychoanalysis to understand how organizations work. So anthropology was there pretty much from day one, right? This is something that we need to really write about in the history of anthropology. But it's looking at, the meetings. I gave the talk, and I hear so much about, we have too many meetings. And this was the name of the title in lots of the business journals and the newspapers, the financial, lots of things about meetings as destroying everything, especially online and Zoom. And I flipped it, as all anthropologists should do, is flip something and say, maybe this term, we have too many meetings here, is a defense mechanism. And what I started to do was look at the ethnography of meetings and meetings that I sat in, to realize actually that they are communicating lots of other things beyond the primary task. So meetings should be there to make a decision, or sharing information, or resolving conflict. These are what meetings traditionally are for. But actually, I saw that actually people would use meetings as a means of checking each other out. What are you wearing? Or, and I use an example of the water bottle. But meetings are also there as a means of trying to drive change, but there is conflict that isn't being dealt with, that exists within the meeting. So therefore, it's too fearful. We won't come to a decision, okay? So we'll have another meeting. And we'll have another meeting. So a meeting becomes an avoidance of conflict. Yeah. So I was trying to show actually that meetings have so many different dynamics to them. And what I introduced was a model that I've created, or a tool, called the Culture Empathy Map. And it's a process, a step process that people, either consultants or anthropologists, can use, or it's something I train leaders to use. And that's, how do you decode the rituals, being the anthropologist in the meeting? What's actually going on in front of me? And how do I know to prepare for that? But also, how do I know to reflect afterwards based on that? So it's called the Culture Empathy Map, and it's a tool that's there not just for meetings, but also for workshops and group dynamics within organizations. You're
almost trying to make them see the world as an anthropologist might. And right,
that's exactly.
You need to step out and look in as if you weren't part of the meeting, if you're going to really understand what's going on there. If not, you're going to be a participant in that game, as opposed to an observer of that game. And I said, good leaders sit and listen and watch for a while before they participate, because you really don't know what's coming at you until you watch. But if you're going to respond to everything and get involved in it, then you really are going to be part of the problem, not necessarily a leader to take you out of it. It's an interesting thing.
That's so good about the idea of listening as well. Leaders need to listen to learn and not listen to respond.
Yes.
You know, that you respond once you've done the learning and you've done the reflection, then you respond. That's a really good point.
Yep. Well, even as I'm listening to you and myself, the tendency on my part is to try and take what we're talking about and put it in the context of things that I've experienced. I'm trying to make it relevant in some fashion, reflecting perhaps, but I'm going to urge our listeners to listen carefully to what John's telling you, whether it's in a meeting or in your business or in your family life. Before you jump in and answer, wait, listen, because what you think you heard isn't really what they said, nor what they meant. And so consequently, you have a lot of interesting things going on here in terms of the dynamics. So on that note, I do have to wrap us up, because as much as I love talking to you, it's such a pleasure. It's truly an honor. I'm having such fun. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful. It's an honor to be on your podcast.
Yeah, John, if they want to reach you, where will they do that?
Okay, well, I on Twitter, at Dr. J Curran. LinkedIn, I'm quite active on LinkedIn as well, and I've got a podcast called the Decoding Culture podcast, and there's also a newsletter called Decoding Culture. So those are the places you can find me. I'm out there somewhere.
Well, we'll make sure that's all on the blog, and people can find you even on the video at the back of it. Thank you for joining me today. For our listeners, I know you enjoy our conversations. Keep sending us great people to talk to. I found John on LinkedIn or a post of some kind. I went, let's do it. And he was so kind to come and join us. So now remember, my books are available at Amazon. Rethink is about smashing the myths of women in business. And it's about 11 women who did just that, talk about change. And On the Brink is a fresh lens to help your business grow with a little anthropology, to help you see, feel, and think in new ways. It's why On the Brink with Andi Simon emerged as a podcast. And I love doing this. So send me your thoughts at info@andisimon.com, and we'll get back to you right away. My new book comes out in September 23. It's called Women Mean Business. And it's the wisdom of 101 trailblazing women who are sharing with you their insights. They very much want to help elevate other women. And I must tell you, as you read their wisdoms, you go, this is like a Bible of all my best stuff. None of them were profit-driven, no purpose. They want to help others. They build networks. It's very interesting. Culturally, listening to women from different industries talk about their lessons learned and how to share it. So I'll send you a copy as soon as it comes out, John. Take care now. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. Stay well, stay safe. Remember, turn your observations into innovations. Be a little anthropological. You can be an anthropologist too. Just look, see what you think. Bye now.